got projector magic. The AV guys here are fantastic, so thank you very much. Usually the beginning of my talk is 5 minutes fiddling with the projector trying to get it to work, so it's very nice to not have to do that today. Anyway, so I guess I don't need too big of an introduction. I'm Valerie. Most of what I do at SecureCon is pen testing and vulnerability assessment. So that's probably what I do about 95% of the time. So life is pretty good. I can't complain that much. SecureCon is based out of the Washington, D.C. area. And we focus about half on critical infrastructure and SCADA, and the other half in government and commercial. So I spend about half of my time in power plants with hard hats and strange outfits on, and the other half in weird government buildings. So we have a pretty nice mix. So it gives me a pretty unique perspective on our world right now. I did co-author a book on creating an awareness program. If you are a glutton for punishment, be sure to write a book about a topic that everyone hates. It was pretty interesting. But some of the same principles that I discussed in the book we're going to use today. They'll still apply. I do a lot of social engineering as part of my job. I do a lot of training as well. So this year at DEF CON, I taught RFID and I taught social engineering. So if you want to learn more about that, I've got lots of great resources for you. Physical access. So I got into physical access as kind of a means to an end, right? As a pen tester and doing red teams, sometimes our flags are not domain admin. You what? Yeah, I saw everybody's heads come up. Sometimes the flag is something different. Sometimes it's, hey, see if you can get in there. See if you can compromise this server. We don't care how you do it. So it's been interesting to see how some of our clients have really evolved in the way that they look at penetration testing. And they're starting to see the big picture here. So I am most definitely not an expert on physical access systems. I label myself as an enthusiast. I learned a lot here and there that I've picked up along the way, and learning more every day. So quick agenda here. We're going to talk about why it is that I chose this topic today. Quick overview. So the topology for physical access systems is a little bit different than what we're used to seeing in IT, so I thought that I'd take some time there. Then we'll talk about why it's so bad. And we'll get into some cool attack surfaces and exploits toward the end. And we'll tie it all together, and I'll walk you through one of our recent engagements. So why physical access systems? They're everywhere. Everywhere. Everywhere somebody swipes a card, everywhere somebody scans a key fob, all through the airport. I saw lots of good card readers at the airport today. I'm sure that some of you took the train to get here. EasyLink cards, right? Same principles apply. No, I did not hack the EasyLink card. I've only admired it and contemplated, but I did not bring any equipment with me. A lot of times when I give these talks at non-technical conferences, nobody will come up close to me because they're afraid I'm going to steal their information from their cards. None of that today. No equipment, nothing up my sleeves. We should be good. But some of the less obvious places for these types of systems, hotels. If you're staying at the hotel here, the cards that you use to tap to get into your room, that's a high-frequency access card. Resisted that temptation too. It's still there. And schools. A lot of the schools, at least in the States, the staff will have some type of access card or some kind of access control to get into the building when they have the doors locked during the day. So as I have children, that's a personal interest to me, because if they're running a vulnerable system, I would like to help them fix that so my children are safer in school. So what exactly is a physical access system? So for the longest time when I was first starting out using these in pen testing, to me that meant card and card reader. And that was really all that I had looked at in the past. But there's a whole lot of other infrastructure that supports that. Basically, it's a group of components that will control access to a certain area. So we're going to step through them. Some of these are going to be a little obvious, some are going to be a little bit new. The control point, probably a pretty good one to start with, yes? So this is usually where you have to present a credential. So this could be something like a door or a gate, man traps. I've seen a few of those around here at the train station. When you put your card down to tap your card, your EasyLink card, so that the turnstile opens, that's a access control point. The little thing that you're tapping your card to is called the reader. Pretty obvious there. The card is usually in physical access referred to as a credential. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a card. Some of the credentials look like this, the little tags people could put on their keychains. We use a lot of those in shared office buildings in the States. You have different suites with different folks. A lot of times they'll use those tags, A, because they're cheap, and B, because they're very easy to set up. Unfortunately, they're also very vulnerable, which we'll get into. So the access card itself, you've got two main varieties. We've got low frequency and we've got high frequency. So the low frequency, they operate at 125 kilohertz, and it just holds a small amount of data on there. So that's why you see these ones used a lot in the lower end systems. Most of the key fobs and tags that you have are going to be low frequency. Occasionally there are some high frequency ones, but for the most part, those are going to be low frequency tags. They're unencrypted, so whatever is on there is there for the taking. Your EasyLink card is not low frequency, by the way, so your train fare is safe for today anyway. High frequency cards, so these ones are more of the wave of the future, yes? They operate at 13.56 megahertz, and the reason this is so that we can put more data into the wave. So if you're using a low frequency card and you present that to the reader and it beeps, the beep basically means that it has read it, but then there's that delay that you'll get between when the reader beeps and the turnstile opens. So for the low frequency cards, because they're so slow, it doesn't send a lot of data. So if we wanted to send more data, you would be standing there for 5, 10, 15 seconds. And in high volume environments, that's just not acceptable. So that's why we're starting to switch more to the high frequency cards. So the one down here on the bottom, get my laser pointer out here. This card here, this is actually a multi-class card. So inside of this card, you've got your chips here and here. This is where the data lives on the card, that little piece of data that we're going to use as our credential. So the outside antenna here, the outside line there, that's our high frequency antenna. So usually cards have a high or a low frequency, bless you. But sometimes they do have both for environments where they're trying to gravitate away from the low frequency. So basically what happens is when we put this up to the reader will power the little chip inside, and it will broadcast our data to the reader. So the low frequency cards, they're kind of like children. They just shout out their information over and over again. So the low frequency is always, "Hi, I'm Billy. Hi, I'm Billy." It's not capable of interacting any other way. So that's also why these are used in lower end systems that aren't as sophisticated. The high frequency cards, they're actually capable of two-way interaction. So that's why you'll see a lot of these used in the airport, for instance, highly controlled areas where they want a little bit of extra security there. But we'll also touch on that a little bit later and kind of lift the veil on how that works. So a quick little visual to kind of go along with that. So this is basically what happens when we present our card to the reader. So you'll notice that I've got these two numbers up here. So in physical access, on these cards, we have two pieces of data. We've got our facility code, and that's usually going to be the same for every system. And then we've got our card number. So this is what will be unique to the card holder. As you can see in the low frequency, we go pretty slow, so we don't want folks standing there for a long time. So that's why it only transmits the facility code and the card number. The high frequency, as you can see, we've got a lot of extra here. So they've added some encryption to this. It's not very good encryption, but it is encryption nonetheless. When the reader actually beeps and it reads the card, the reader does not make any decisions. It's basically just a repeater. So it will read the data and just spit it out on the other side to the access control panel. So from the reader to the access control panel, this is actually copper wire, not Ethernet. The reason for this being these systems, they can't tolerate network latency, right? Because if they have a delay getting back and forth to the server, then you've got people standing there tapping their card over and over again, waiting to get into the building. So currently those use copper wire for that reason. So the access control panel, it's just a small board, and we're going to see a photo of it here in a few minutes. It's not very intelligent. It has a few basic jobs. Its biggest job is to translate. So it will decode the data that it has sent, and it will read the data for the facility code and the card number and compare it to an access list. Now, if you notice down here, the numbers that I have on the chip that's in the card, there are a lot here, but the facility code and the card number are kind of spaced out. IT people would think that this is a security feature, but in the physical security world, this is only custom formatting so that you don't buy cards from anybody else. So this is primary example of security through obscurity right now. They just want to try to lock you into being able to only buy from them. And we're going to see a lot of that in the next slides. The physical access world is very behind IT in that sense. So we've got these little control boards that are making all of the decisions. They do have a mothership, the access control server. That's where everybody, they'll maintain the list of all the card numbers and the groups and who's allowed to go where. Normally Windows, I have not, in my experience, seen a non-Windows access control server. I highly doubt that they're out there. Look at some of the other things that are in here, though. So this is kind of cool. The card format details live in this server. So it's going to be important when we get to some of the other attacks as to why that's cool. And then we've got our door components. So after the controller reads the card number, compares it to the access list, and sees, yes, this card number is active and it is allowed to open this door, it will then send the signal to the door contact. So the door contact is for maglock doors, the ones with the magnets. Trying to think of a good one that's common. The hotel rooms have them, but I know not everybody's staying at the hotel. Probably you've seen them in schools. You swipe the card, you wait. You usually don't hear that click very much, and it releases the magnet so that you can open the door. The electric strike is just a anti-tamper device that will send back to the control server whether the door is open or closed. So if the door is not closed, but it should be, that will send an alarm for somebody to go and look. But normally they don't. And then we've got a request to exit. So that's for the inside of the door. So the inside of the door, when you're ready to leave the control area, sometimes that's a motion sensor that will release the magnetic lock. Sometimes that's a button. Sometimes you have to scan your card to get out. So lots of good examples for all of that. Even in the train station, right? That's a request to exit when you swipe your EasyLink card on the way out. So if we put that into more of a graphical representation, this is basically our flow. So the weekend protocol is the protocol that the controller understands. And it's basically just like a modified binary. It's very, very basic. There's lots of great documentation out there if you're interested. It's not too hard to pick up. So that's really the language and the protocol that it's using to talk back and forth. But again, that's happening on copper. So if we were to place a network sniffer close by, we're not going to see this traffic here. We will see some of this traffic where the controller talks to the mothership, but this only happens a couple of times a day. This does not happen very often. So this tiny little circuit board here is really what's making all of our decisions for us during the day as to who is allowed to enter or exit certain areas at certain times. So very rarely will these two talk to each other. So when we swipe, the reader is just a repeater. It just takes whatever it reads and just spits it out to the controller. So the controller is very important, and it is often forgotten. Here's a different diagram to kind of help illustrate it a little bit better. The door contacts are usually at the top here. I have another picture later on that will show it, make it a little bit easier for you to tell which ones are maglocks and which ones aren't. Your strike plate is here, and our reader. And then not all doors have a request to exit. Some do not. It just depends on the way that the environment is set up. So each of these controllers can handle between 1 and 16, give or take, access points. So doors, gates, elevators, whatnot. So in larger environments, you're going to find that these are tiered and that they're structured. A lot of my clients, each floor of the building will have its own controller. So there are lots of little controllers out there that are making the decisions for us. In some of your more mature implementations, we have the main control panel. And the main control panel is the only one that talks to, that talks to our access control server. So if we were, again, looking at network traffic, we wouldn't really see these guys talking to anybody because they speak to each other in the main controller panel on copper. So it's kind of important to understand because as IT people, we automatically think Ethernet and that we can capture that data one way or another. So that will make a big difference in the kinds of attacks that we can do. So the split personality of security. And this one is one of the biggest reasons why we have trouble in the physical access world. Physical security and computer security are responsible for the same things. We're both supposed to be protecting the data that lives in the servers in our environment. But the physical side is undervalued. So if you tell somebody that, oh, I work in cybersecurity, usually you get the, oh, wow, you must be really smart, hacking computers and stuff. But if you tell somebody that you work in physical security, you kind of get the, oh, well, you'll get a better job someday. I mean, that's just temporary, right? But again, we're protecting the same thing. So we definitely need some culture shift here. The controls are designed very differently in the physical access world as well. The controls are pretty much just designed and implemented by an electrical contractor or a vendor, and that's it. There's no security steps involved. So I think you can see where this is going. The gap there, it's closing. So the more that we rely on these intelligent systems to maintain and control access, the more we need the network and the components to be secure. But nobody really thought about that yet. So the physical access world is they're really about 15 years behind IT. So if you think about the way security was, late 1990s, early 2000s, it's pretty different than what it is today, right? There's no maturity model for these guys. There aren't really responsible disclosure programs for physical security vendors. If they find a vulnerability, most of the time it is not reported. So when you start looking at CVEs, you'll notice that there's not really a lot of information on physical access vendors in there. They're reliant on IT, but they don't understand IT. And that's really where we start to have a big problem, especially with the new systems. So the newer systems, when they install the physical access control server, and they'll put the control panels in. The control panels, the new ones, can talk TCP/IP if you put them on the network. They still make a lot of their decisions, and a lot of their communication is still copper. They decided to move a lot of that to TCP/IP just for monitoring purposes. So it's more of, it's there for health and configuration purposes, not for actual operation. So that sounds all well and good, except for when we look at the architecture and we look at how it's installed, the physical security people will say, hey, we need these hooked up to the network, and we need one of those VLAN things, because we understand that that's secure, that's what we want. Network guy says, no problem, I got you. Here's your own VLAN. Here's all your addresses. We'll hook all your stuff up, make sure that it works, and you're good to go. Vendor comes in, tells firewall guy, hey, we need these 6 ports open so that this can communicate. And once everything works, it's forgotten. But what's important is that because they didn't involve anybody in security, that VLAN is usually routable to everywhere. So there's really no point in having the VLAN because it's not doing its job. But the physical access people don't know that because they don't understand IT. And the cybersecurity people aren't involved. And the network guy says, well, I did my job. You said you wanted a VLAN. There's your VLAN. So we're going to see a lot of things like that throughout the presentation. Just small little mishaps, things that we in IT did a long time ago. So because this is so vendor reliant, we put a lot of trust in the vendors on the physical access side. There's not a lot of evaluation that happens. And HID Global is one of the largest vendors out there for physical access. I'm sure that you've seen their readers around. They're kind of everywhere. Some are obvious, some are not. But they decided that when they started to go to high frequency that they would encrypt things. But again, these are physical access people. They don't understand the same principles that we do in IT. So they decided that they were going to encrypt everything. And they did so with the same key everywhere. So all of the standard security iClass around the world has the same private key. And their thought was, well, nobody would be able to figure out what it was. So at CCC, it's been almost 5 years ago now, there was a presentation by a group of researchers that basically extracted the private key from one of these readers and tested it, and they can reproduce these encrypted iClass cards using that key. So this was a big problem, but HID, again, because they don't have responsible disclosure and the same things that we have on the IT side, just basically kind of brushed it off, and they said, well, you know, there are only a few people that do that. There's not really a threat there. So this is some of the problems that we have. That's one of the paramount problems in physical access. So now we've got all these systems, and this is the latest and greatest in physical access out there with the same private key everywhere. This is important because it's going to be able to enable us to produce our own clones of the cards because we have the key. The physical security culture is also a problem. You know, in IT, we're very used to the break, fix, update kind of environment. You know, Patch Tuesday and all of that stuff. You know, monthly patches and whatnot. On the physical side, once that system is installed, everybody forgets about it. The server group maintains the Windows server for access control. They make sure that it's up, right, and that it gets patched. But aside from that, nobody's really looking at the software that's installed and what's happening there. The lack of technical understanding, like we discussed earlier, just kind of adds to the problem because the physical security people don't know to ask the right questions. They don't know what those questions are. They're also very vendor loyal. So when we exploited this iClass vulnerability recently on a penetration test, wrote it all up. This is how we did it. This is what happened. This is why we were able to do this. Here are the things that you can do to kind of help offset this risk. They took it to the vendor, who you can't actually buy from HID Global direct. You have to buy through, you know, a contractor. They took the report to the vendor, and the vendor said, well, that's not really true. It doesn't work that way. And that was good enough for them. Well, the vendor said that that's not a problem. and we went to a steak dinner, and life was good. They're very loyal to their vendors, so they don't quite understand the whole independent security researcher yet. Hopefully we can change that. So let's look at some of the attack surfaces. We've got lots of cool things that we can do here. So now that we understand all of the pieces, we can start to look at how they fit together and ways that we can attack them. So I don't want to focus just on access cards here, but I do think it's important to at least review some of the attacks that are out there. So if you want to read more about it, I've got some reference links in here that you can go check it out. So in the earlier days of access card attacks, we had the Proxmark III. Now the Proxmark III, for those of you who may not be familiar, is a RFID research tool. We use it for research. We would never use it for malicious purposes, ever. The problem with the Proxmark, while that looks very small, it's about the size of an SSD. So it'll fit in your hand, but it needs an antenna and it needs a power supply. So the antenna for low frequency cards is about the size of a CD. So then you've got the antenna, the cable, the Proxmark, and then I normally use like a cell phone battery pack, like a small juice pack. It doesn't need very much power. But you've got all these things, and you're supposed to be able to carry them and be able to get close to somebody to record their card data without being noticed. And the read range on the Proxmark III was just a few centimeters. Right? It's very hard to get this close to somebody's access card without making it very awkward. So we looked at some different ways to disguise it. This was my RFID binder of doom, I like to call it. I just took a regular binder from the office supply store and cut open the back part of it so that we could conceal everything inside. So even if somebody were to pick this up and just physically examine it, it would look just like a regular binder. So you got the Proxmark III here at the bottom, and then my little juice pack on this side. And then I've got the antenna here on the other side. So as you can see, it's definitely the size of a CD. So that made it a lot more portable. So when I was walking and I needed to get close to somebody and I could kind of bump them with it. The problem with the binder was the leather was preventing the card from getting power because the Proxmark doesn't output a lot of power. It's just a small device. It's not meant to be used in the field. Plus these cables here came loose a lot, and it would lose all of its data if the cable came loose. So it was not very field friendly. We did start to use the Gridits. If you have not used a Gridit before, it's designed to hold all of your little odds and ends all together in your bag. It's perfect for the Proxmark because it holds everything in place, so nothing is shifting around. So we didn't have the problem with the cables coming undone. You put the antenna right in the corner, you put this whole thing inside of a laptop sleeve, and then you can be a lot more mobile and less obvious. You can kind of swing it as you're walking and, kind of get close to somebody and accidentally tap them with it, and that's okay. I got lots of reads at Starbucks in the morning with this. But again, you're still limited, just a few centimeters. Pretty awkward. A few years ago, the folks at Bishop Fox really started to take some steps to help us with that. So now we have some cool long-range readers that basically take a working access card reader and modify it so that we can record the data. So it's about 1 foot square and about an inch or so thick. So it's not small, but it is portable. You can put it in a messenger bag or a small backpack or a big lady bag. I usually use the big lady bag and walk around and get your good stuff. You can use it for a few different technologies, but you have to buy a different reader for each one of these. So the readers, they're about $500 or $600 each. So that it gets expensive. So normally we just have one per team instead of everybody having their own. It doesn't quite understand custom card formats though. So if you have a client who uses a different card format for one reason or another, probably because that's what the vendor sold them, because it's secure, sometimes it confuses the long-range reader. 90% of the time, it does the job, though. So basically, it takes the Wiegand output that we discussed earlier from the reader, Puts it through here in our little PCB board, writes all of the contents to the micro SD into a flat text file. And it will just read and record, read and record. So the Bishop Fox design used a lot of AA batteries. And this would only power it for a few hours. And then the batteries would die. So that got pretty expensive and kind of annoying because it's a lot, 12 batteries to change all the time. But it did do the job. So instead of having to worry about juggling the Proxmark III, if we walked around at lunchtime, we would have a really nice output file that had the bit count of the card, its hex value, what its facility code was, and its card number. And then if you want the binary, it's there, but this is all the information that it had decoded from the binary. So that saves a lot of time, right? Now I have the two pieces of information that I need. I can use the Proxmark in my hotel room to write the cards, the copies of the cards. So it saves a lot of time, saves a lot of effort. The read range on this is about 3 feet. So that's pretty far. You can get a lot of card reads without getting all awkward. So it was worth every last penny that I spent on this. So some other folks decided to take that design and run with it to try to improve it a little bit. And they started using a lot of the new Arduino pieces. So it does the same thing, RavenHID, basically. They just don't mount it quite the same. This is a low frequency reader that they're showing here. So you can actually fit everything inside of it and put its cover back on, except for that battery there on the outside. So the battery pack replaces the 12 AA batteries that you're always having to change. If you're interested in making one of these for yourself, I recommend this power bank. This is what I use in ours. It's got to have a 12-volt output, though, and that will power the device for 6+ hours. And really, the read range is so good, you don't really need 6+ hours to get what you're after. So those are some RFID-based attacks. But again, physical access is kind of behind the curve on a lot of this stuff. So if we go low tech, they actually put the card number on most of the cards. So it's kind of like writing your password on your badge and leaving it there and never changing it. So that's kind of interesting. So this opens up a lot of different avenues for social engineering. Sometimes we just do phone calls and impersonate security employees and get the employee to read us the numbers off of the back. So the numbers on the back here, the smaller 5-digit one here, this is the card number. This here is the order tracking number. So this is so their supplier can look up their card information in case they need to know what to order. So if you really want to do some social engineering on the vendor, you can try, but I haven't had to. There's always an easier way. But this only gets us 50% of the way, right? We only have the card number. We don't have the facility code yet. But that's okay, because they also print it on the label that goes on the box. Why, I'm not exactly sure. You can buy these on eBay, by the way. So another social engineering opportunity that we like to use, we find out their supplier for their access cards and call and ask them, what the next range is that they need based on the last range. And we want to verify their information. So we have found that in a lot of social engineering attacks, it's much easier to provide misinformation to get your target to correct you instead of just flat out asking. So if I call and I tell them, I'm working on your next order, I have card number 3155, last in your sequence with facility code 12. And I know that 12 isn't right. Usually they'll just correct me. Oh no, it's not 12, it's 122. They laugh, I laugh, and I thank them and wish them a good day. So then we have both pieces. And we didn't need any equipment but the phone. So that's kind of cool, a little cheaper that way. What about the reader? So the reader is not very intelligent, but we can still tap into it if we would like to. So this is a new device that was showcased at Black Hat this year. I have one of these. I have not tried it myself. So it's a small key. The folks that made it are Canadian, which is why it's compared to the Canadian coin. Basically, these 3 little bays here, you attach wires in the back of the reader. So the readers are pretty easy to pull off of the wall, and then you can install that little piece and put it back on the wall. And it will collect all of the information and send it to your phone via Bluetooth if you get close enough, so that you don't even have to worry about taking it out again, because that just increases your chance of being discovered. It also saves the mall local in case you do want to retrieve it and pull your card data off manually. Now, it also has a replay action. So if I'm standing close by with my phone and somebody comes and swipes their card and it opens the door, I can actually send a replay command to the key to replay that same information to open the door for me or for one of my coworkers. And it just looks like I'm texting on my phone. Kind of cool. So if you want to check it out, they have the presentation here and the hardware list. They did sell a few at BLEKey. I think they were $20. So it's a very cheap solution to being able to get in. The software for your phone is free. Comes with a device. So request to exit devices. We talked about these just a little bit in the beginning. And I'm sure that everybody has seen these in controlled areas. These sit right above the doors. And usually when you start to approach them, you'll hear a click. That click is it releasing the mag stripe. So it's actually releasing the door lock. This is cool because from the other side of the door, we can start to use this to our advantage, especially in a door like this. Okay, so I had mentioned earlier that we were going to point out ones that had magnetic locks. So this is where the magnetic plates sit in the door. So when it gets the unlock signal, it will signal the magnet to release that on the door. Couple things wrong with this door, though, from a physical security perspective. One of which is there's a really nice gap in between the 2 doors and a really nice gap underneath. We're going to use those to our advantage to trigger that request to exit device. And on a side note, the hinges are on the outside, so if that doesn't work, you can just take the door off and go that way. It's pretty easy. You can just hit the bottom with a hammer, the hinges pop off, and you just kind of like rest the door off to the side. So for our space in between and underneath of the door, if we want to signal the request to exit device, we use a very sophisticated piece of equipment, a coat hanger. I like to use the one that says "We love our customers" because it makes me smile when I see it in their report. I'm pretty sure they do not see the same humor, but that's okay. So basically, we undo the coat hanger, we fold it out a little bit, and we make a little flag. And we slide the coat hanger between the space in the doors, and we just wave it around enough to activate that request to exit device. And you'll know that it's released because you'll hear a big ka-chunk from the click from where it's releasing the door. So as you're out walking around, just in your daily life, when you start to go through doors, like in and out of the office or in and out of the mall, just start listening. Like, you'd be amazed at how many of these devices are around. I put a video clip in here. I don't know if it will work or not. So this is how quickly you can pop one of these doors open, and it doesn't work. Oh, wait, let me try. Haha. Yeah, so all he did was slide that hanger up and put it right against the request to exit device, and it popped the door. 3 seconds, tops. So that works most of the time. However, there are some folks that have adjusted that read range of the device to be further out from the door to prevent people like me from putting a coat hanger underneath and waving it around. So I do have another very sophisticated piece of equipment that I use for that. Big balloons. And the ones that you use to make the animals, because they're bigger. You put it underneath of the door and you use a hand pump to inflate it. And you wait until it's just about ready to pop and you let go. And on the other side of the door, the balloon goes like this, and it clicks and the door opens. The only problem with this is when the door doesn't open and you have a very large stack of balloons on the other side that you can't get to. It gets a little bit awkward the next day with the client. You're like, I don't know what your cleaning crew is doing. You should check on that. I don't know. no clue, man. So request to exit is cool. A lot of these new systems have a lot of nice features. We had a client that put these doors in their data center. They were very proud of these doors. They basically work like the ones at the grocery store. I don't really know why they needed these doors, but they liked it. So if they had their hands full, they could just kind of swipe, and then the door would just automatically open for them. It did have a request to exit enabled on it, so they had to badge in and badge out so that you could account for the time that they were in the data center. But unfortunately, sometimes things are very easily defeated by just giving it a shove. That was a pretty awkward moment too. So he didn't scan anything. He just pushed it open. So fire regulation in the States requires that that door be able to freely open in case of a fire alarm. There's a better way to implement it, and it's not this way. So we did help them fix that. They were not nearly as amused as we were, though. Back to the control panel. So remember in the earlier slides, I kept highlighting that tiny little circuit board. It's so important, and nobody thinks about it once it works anymore. Some of our environments that we go into, there are 10 to 20, sometimes 30 of these devices in their environment for all of the buildings. So not just the campus that we're on. It will also control the building doors for other cities. So it's kind of cool. That's always a fun demo. If we get into their system, we can open the door in Michigan when we're sitting in Washington, D.C. Kind of neat. So the controllers, because they have started putting the Ethernet connection on them for health monitoring reasons and diagnostic reasons, are reachable 99% of the time from the general IP space. Back to that VLAN problem. Tiny things that we have learned over the years in IT that physical access has not. So it's pretty easy to find them once you understand what exactly it is that you're looking for. They don't look very exciting when you get the scan results back, though. So they're not very intelligent. They have tiny little web servers. Sometimes there's an FTP server on there. Some of the vendors have SNMP open. I'm talking like public-private string. I don't normally mess with that too much because it's pretty easy to send the device into a reboot loop, and I don't want to change their string, so we just encourage them to disable that because they don't need it. They don't even know what SNMP is. They don't need it enabled. Anonymous FTP, this one's my favorite. So you can just anonymous FTP to the device and start looking around. And most of the time when you do that, you'll find passwords for the controller and for some of the other systems, like for the server. We'll look at one here in just a minute. The devices, again, though, they're single board computers. They don't even really have a full TCP/IP stack, I don't think. They're very fragile. So I'm talking like Nmap and Nessus, like sometimes can knock them over. So if you're going to look at some of these, just be kind of gentle with it. You can port scan it, but slow it down. Usually you'll see a web server that's open on there, and it will only work in Internet Explorer. Not very often I endorse Internet Explorer, but this is one of the instances where you need it. So that usually requires firing up the Windows VM to check it out. But this is how they're missed on a lot of pen tests, because when you run the script to take the screenshot of the page as it's checking each web page in your results, you just get a blank screen. So that's one way that you can tell pretty quickly that there's probably something more here. Don't change the settings on it. They're very fragile, and they'll have to have the vendor come in, and they may not be able to fix it. And some of the controllers are very expensive, in the range of $10,000 plus. So we really don't want to break those. If you're going to look for these on the network, some common ports they have open, like I mentioned before, FTP, they've got port 80 open usually, Telnet, sometimes, Telnet, yeah. 9999, that's a big one. And if you telnet to 9999, it will just dump you into the configuration menu. It doesn't ask you for a password, it just assumes that you belong there. and will just drop you right into where you need to be. It's fantastic. But what can they tell us? Well, remember what they hold. They're basically the bouncer at the door, right? You're not on the list, you can't come in. You're on the list, you can't come in. You're on the list, but you're only allowed to come in between 8 and 5 during the day, so you can't come in right now. So they have a lot of data that we could use if we wanted to make our own, if we wanted to write our own cards at that point. So if I'm in a test where we don't compromise the physical access server, but we get access to some of these door controllers, that's fine. It's full of badge numbers. We can just make valid badges all day long. That's okay. Here's one of the sample configurations from one of the less intelligent door controllers. I know that you probably can't see that very well from the audience, but it's got allow telnet connections. Trust everybody because we're very trusting. It sends its configuration to a backup server every day via FTP. So at the bottom here, you'll see FTP login, username is backup, and FTP password is blank. Now, what was entertaining with this was that we were able to use that to get into the access control server itself, and then pull down all the passwords from there, and then just control their entire environment. Kind of a problem. Some of the more intelligent controllers, like I mentioned before, they've got some stuff on there for diagnostic testing and health monitoring. They have a very chatty web server. It's very helpful. It doesn't require a password. You just hit it on port 80 with Internet Explorer, and it will just tell you whatever it is that you want to know. So it's so helpful that it will tell you that, hey, this is my IP, and these are all the IPs of my friends. These are all the devices that are around me that I can see on the network that I can run diagnostics on as well. Okay. It's also got a cool drop-down menu here that will take you, it's a shortcut to every controller that it knows about. So it might have 5 neighbors, it might have 10 neighbors. If you happen to hit the master controller, like we had talked about earlier, then you can see all of them. So it's very useful because you can start to use these to figure out, they're usually based on their names, where in the building it controls. So I don't know, if I was going to do this, I'd probably want something that opens like the data center, or in our SCADA environments, the control room. That'd be cool. They hate it when you do that. So it's very chatty. It's also got a tiny little database on it about all kinds of great stuff, like personnel and tracking. That's cool. I'm interested in those. And it's basically just its access log. Here are all of the scans that I've received, the day, the time, the badge number, and what group they belong to. So now I can just make copies of all of these cards if I want. We can use a different access card each time we want to go into the building. So it will make it very difficult for them to trace if they're paying attention, which they probably aren't because it's a valid badge, to find where it is that's coming from. So if they figure out that the first badge here is compromised and they deactivate it, that's fine. You know, I've got 500 more. We'll just cycle through. So it makes it difficult on the physical access side to understand what's happening. There's also a tool called Vertex that will go out and help you look for some of the controllers, but this is specific to HID global controllers. So it's cool, it does a lot of fun things, but if your client isn't using HID controllers, it's not going to help you. So we've talked about everything but the mothership. And our mothership in this case is usually a Windows server that has some software on there. And that's pretty much all that it's used for. Sometimes with the smaller implementations, they will host their database locally on the box. So not only will you have access to the software that you can view and modify the access control groups, you can also just dump the database, take it with you, and look at it later in your hotel room. And then you have everybody's card number, everybody's access group, what the card format looks like, and so on. So that's pretty useful. Small things. It's usually named something in DNS like Secure 9000, which is the name of the software that they use for access control. Little common sense things that give it away. So sometimes it's not nearly as hard to find it as you might think. Some of the keywords, like if you're parsing through Nessus results or you're looking through some in-map stuff, here's some of the big ones. Nice list in there for you. You can look for the rest. Sometimes you don't have to try to locate these on the network. We all know Shodan, right? You can just find it on the internet. Why worry about trying to get internal access somewhere if I can just get it from the outside? That's cool. I'm kind of lazy when it comes to pen testing. So if I can find something like this and not have to worry about getting internal access and compromising another host and using it as a jump box, I won't, because I don't need to. So some of the keywords that I've got here, those are fun to search for in Shodan. Just be polite, okay? Because they're going to have a bad day eventually. Other resources. So physical security people, again, they don't think like IT people. So their SharePoint sites and email and whatnot will be full of valid card numbers, dates, card formats, all of the stuff that you need. So if, for example, you get access to one of the security officers' accounts on the network, you can probably find all the information that you need to create badges or login information for the actual physical access server somewhere in SharePoint or somewhere in their email, or a lot of their how-to guides have all the passwords in them because security guards aren't expected to remember passwords, I guess. So in the States, they'll let security guards hang out with a weapon at the front door, but remembering passwords is hard, so they don't have to do that part. Never quite understood this logic. Their workstations are great targets too. We actually used one of those recently in an engagement that I was on. We had all their data ahead of time from all the recon that we did off-site. I could tell that they were probably using iClass cards based on the readers, the pictures of the readers that I got from Google Street View. So I already knew what equipment to pack, which was great because those readers are kind of, heavy, and if you got to take all three, then it's interesting at the airport. So I already knew basically what kind of technology they were using because they were, broadcasting photos of their readers on the internet. Awesome. I haven't even left and I already know what I need to do. We used Flickr to find some company photos where people had left their ID cards on for the picture. So we have one of these printers at the office here. You can buy these on eBay for a few $100s. Pretty good. So this will basically just print on top of the access card. So there's none of this, I don't do this run to Kinko's thing and try to self-laminate it and get all the bubbles out so that it looks like a good card anymore. We just use some free software and design it and print it ourselves. So we'll leave with a big stack of cards that already look like badges. And then once we're there, we'll get the data and program them. Once we were on site, we were kind of hanging out. We got some good captures. We got some good card data with a long-range reader for iClass. And we noticed that one of the security stations in the visitor center at 4 o'clock every day, they left it open. Everybody went home at 4 o'clock. The other security station somebody was always at, but this one was always empty from 4 p.m. to 7 a.m. the next day. So that's cool. We used one of our cards that we lifted the data for, browsed in there one night, and used, old school keylogger. So I'm pretty sure they put wireless keyboards in because of this. Just put it in line with their keyboard and captured all their keystrokes and got, their account information for the domain, their account information for the server. They have to be logged into the access control server each day so that they can see who's active and who's not. Some of the more sophisticated systems for the guards, when you scan your badge and it looks up the ID, it will pop up a picture. So if they're paying attention, which they probably aren't, they're supposed to look at the picture and look at you to be sure that you match the picture on the badge. But they don't always do that. So those pictures, by the way, are usually stored on a open network share. So if I wanted to be sure that my picture came up, I could just replace the JPEG with a picture of me. I did threaten one of them that I was going to replace all of the badge pictures with mine so that they would have to look at me all the time, but I decided that probably wasn't very polite. So from this, we got all kinds of great credentials. 2, 3, 4 shifts worth of credentials because they were coming in and out. as we were collecting keystrokes. We'd go back in with another duplicated card, retrieve our stuff, good to go, right? So we've already have some cards, and that's cool, but like the title says, I don't want one door, I want all the doors. So the physical access server is always kind of the domain admin of the physical access world. That's cool. Back to some of the vendors, how they're not really into the security game yet. I don't really know who decided this was a great idea, but physical access software is usually very expensive and very hard to get. So if I wanted to put the client on my VM, it would be pretty difficult for me to get a copy. But I don't need to, because they made a mobile app. So this is available in the App Store for iPhone and the Android Store. And all you have to do is connect to their wireless, which we were able to do very easily since we had valid credentials that we used from the keylogger. We already knew the IP address of the physical access server from the keylogger data that we had collected. And then we just put the credentials in. So this always amuses me that you can turn off encryption because, you know, encryption is hard and they don't always set up the certificate on the server. So from the parking lot, we have access to their physical access system. So instead of cloning cards, I don't really have to do that. I can just wait until my team member gets up to the door, go into the door control for that specific door, and just hit the temporary unlock button and unlock the door as they approach it. No card needed. And you can do this for all of the doors, or you can tell it to lock them all and not let anybody leave. So at that point, that's kind of our domain admin of the physical access world, right? Because if I can disable the head of security's badge, then, I mean, what else is there for me to do? So that's really how some of these vulnerabilities, smaller ones, fit together. So there are a lot of steps that they need to do to really start to secure these systems. And there's a long road ahead. I mean, they're easily 15 years behind us in IT. And it's going to require a really big culture shift to really help them understand these vulnerabilities and help them take steps to prevent them. A lot of this is preventable. I mean, default passwords, no encryption. Again, circa 1999 for us in IT. We just have to help them catch up. So I'm working on a checklist for them to hopefully use with a security buddy from the network side to help them look at some of these pieces in their own network and evaluate themselves if they can't afford for a consultant to come in and do it for them. So if you have thoughts on this, if you've seen it in the wild, I'm very interested in hearing them. It's pretty much just me and my MacBook right now that are trying to help everybody out. So always looking for new ideas. And on that note, I am out of time, but I will be around the rest of today and tomorrow. If you have questions, or if you just like to chat about it, I would love to. So thank you so much.